Okay, we're going to talk about minerals in a similar manner to what we talked about, how we talked about vitamins. I'm just going to burn through this kind of quickly, and when it comes down to the specific minerals, you should concentrate more on the ones we talk about in class. Okay, here we go. So, uh, well, I want to back up a little bit, just talk about minerals a little bit. So, minerals are basically chemicals or they're molecules that your body does not make. All the minerals in your body, you have to ingest them. All right, so that's the first important thing we want to talk about with them. Okay, then we're just going to read up on your book on some of the properties of minerals, and we will go through some of them individually. So, calcium is really the most abundant uh, mineral in your entire body. So it's involved in bone health. It's involved in you'll find it in you'll find that the absorption can be affected by fiber, phosphorus, and sodium intake as well. Uh, Total intake is really the most important, though. It doesn't matter too much how you mix it with other minerals. Usually, the recommended dose for adults age 19 to 50 is about 1,000 milligrams a day, and that's going to be more for younger people and/or older people, and that is primarily to keep their bones nice and healthy. Okay, so calcium, what is mostly involved in is it's involved in your bone and teeth formation. It's involved in blood clotting. It's very important for that. It's also involved in nerve transmission and muscle contraction. All of the electrical signals in your body are have minerals involved in them, calcium and sodium and potassium, and so calcium regulation is very important for that. Uh, Complications with deficiency tend to be chronic, not acute. So that means they're long-term, not short-term. You don't have enough calcium for a day or a week or a month, and it's really no big deal. But it can be a big deal over the long term, right? So if you have kidney malfunction, you can have major problems with your with deficiencies, and that you're not keeping enough. So the primary problem that you're going to have is going to be poor bone health, right? And the main issue here is that osteoporosis and those bone density related diseases are the chronic. They're not acute. There's something that affects you. It tends to affect you in old age, but it really starts at a young age. I mean, our bones and teeth are primarily made of calcium, right? And if you don't get adequate amounts, you won't build adequate amounts. And we're going to talk more about calcium and bone health, specifically in women, when we talk about the female athlete triad later on in a couple of weeks. So really the main problem is going to be bone health and when you're talking about calcium. So toxicity is going to be rare, except when you take very high supplements. You're definitely not going to get too much calcium on accident. You could have to be taking large amounts of supplements for this to happen. You're going to find it in dairy, green leafy vegetables, and added to a lot of tofu products. Calcium is something that I really think a lot of young women should probably take a small supplement of. 500 milligrams a day is fine. If you'll see, the recommended dosage is 1,000 milligrams a day, and you can get those little calcium chews with the calcium in them. They taste like chocolate. You buy them at Costco or Rite Aid or Vons or whatever. They're very easy to get, and one of those a day really can help make your bones nice and strong. So. Okay, then the next mineral we're going to talk about is phosphorus. So phosphorus works along with calcium to ensure healthy bones and teeth, right? So you have phosphorus in all these bones too. Phosphorus is also found in phospholipid molecules. So when we talk about the phospholipid layer and the parts of your cell membranes, those all have phosphorus in them, okay? Lots of other enzymes. And also ATP, right? ATP, that universal energy carrier for all living things, you'll find phosphorus in that as well. So the RDA for phosphorus is 700 milligrams a day. And deficiencies are really rare, especially in developed countries, but toxicity is possible with supplementation. So these minerals, we don't get rid of them all very well. So something like phosphorus, you don't need a whole lot of it with 700 milligrams a day. You tend to get it, and yeah, so you'd have to have high amounts of supplementation to have toxicity. So the one issue with phosphorus can be, though, antacids can interfere with the absorption. of this stuff. So if you're taking Tums and things like that quite frequently, those actually have calcium in them, and that can be good for your calcium. But those high level of calcium, they basically inhibit the absorption of phosphorus, which can be a bad thing. So some of the long-term effects of deficiency in phosphorus can be bone pain or weak bones, which neither one of those is very good. Okay, so phosphorus has an upper limit of around 4,000 milligrams a day. So too much of this stuff and not enough calcium can lead to osteoporosis. You have to have appropriate levels of each, again, because they affect the absorption of each other. Where are we going to find this stuff? Mostly in animal products, nuts, and legumes. Good protein sources is also where we find phosphorus. If you ever see this in a supplement, some products will claim that it'll increase maximum oxygen intake and performance, but really it looks like it probably does not help very much, if at all. And the danger behind supplementation is that it can have potential effects on bone health. It can affect your calcium levels and affect your bone strength. Okay, so our next mineral we're going to talk about is magnesium. So magnesium is really important for blood clotting, bone health, enzyme function, and blood pressure. You got 300 to 400 milligrams a day, or the approximate registered daily allowance. Deficiencies are rare, but they could lead to heart arrhythmias, muscle cramps, and high blood pressure. So you can get really messed up if you don't have appropriate levels of magnesium. Supplementation is usually not necessary for anybody that has an adequate calorie intake. Right? So as long as you have enough food, you're probably going to get enough magnesium. Toxicity is really uncommon except in cases of kidney malfunction, where you're not excreting the amounts that you need to. So the upper limit is typically 350 milligrams a day. From supplements, you're not going to accidentally get too much from food. There's no upper limit from food, right? You can get as much of this naturally as you want. So where are we going to find this? Grains, green leafy vegetables, legumes, nuts. Okay, another mineral that we're going to talk about is sodium. You probably hear about this one a lot. So the recommended intake of sodium is 1,500 milligrams a day. And where is this involved? It's primarily in maintaining blood pressure. It affects your body water a lot, and anything that affects your body water and your volume of blood is going to affect your blood pressure. Glucose absorption in your gastrointestinal system. It also is involved in conducting electrical signals in the body, right? Just like the calcium we talked about earlier. So that's very important. Deficiency is really rare in sodium, except in cases of prolonged diarrhea or vomiting. Occasionally, you'll hear about hyponatremia. Hyponatremia is water intoxication. So hyponatremia happens when people drink large amounts of water and don't have any salt. So when this will happen, you'll hear about somebody dying of water intoxication. You'll hear about a frat boy that was forced to drink 2 gallons of water. Or I read a story about it was a cop or a fireman that was doing a long day of some sort of training exercise in the heat and drank 1.5 gallons of water and didn't get any sodium or had no food, no salt of any kind. He got water intoxication. With athletes, it's typically not a problem because it takes hours for you to lose enough salt and drink enough water usually to make this happen. So if you're a fast marathoner and you're running a 2.5-hour marathon, you cannot get hyponatremia. It's impossible to sweat and lose enough salt to get hyponatremia, right? So hyponatremia is low salt, high water in your blood, and that really messes up those electrical signals in your heart and your nervous system. But you just can't get it in a short amount of time. So a 2.5-hour marathoner is not going to get hyponatremia. A 5-hour marathoner, they could potentially get hyponatremia. If they take 5 hours, they're out there for a long time, they're drinking only water, they're not having anything with any salt in it, that could be bad. So, when I work with athletes, when I coach bicycle racers, I tell them, anything over a few hours, you need to have some sports drink with some sodium in it, so you don't get hyponatremia. If you're only riding for an hour, hour and a half, they don't need the sodium. They'll replace it as soon as they eat a meal. Okay, so sodium, when it comes to toxicity, our kidneys do a really good job regulating our sodium levels and keeping them from getting too high. So, we do that way. Also, proper sodium balance is going to help make it easier to maintain proper blood pressure. For individuals with high blood pressure, a low sodium diet may help, and too much sodium, on the other hand, inhibits calcium excretion. So it's really important to have all these minerals in appropriate amounts. Foods that are usually high in sodium, table salt is sodium. It's sodium chloride. Canned foods, processed foods, fast foods, those sorts of things. Lunch meats, cheeses also have lots of sodium in them. So that's where we get this stuff. So again, supplements are recommended for most endurance athletes, and that's going to be in the form of electrolyte beverage at around 30 milligrams an hour. So if you look at the recommended intake of, say, Gatorade, how much they say you should drink in an hour, it's going to have about 30 milligrams of sodium in it. And again, when you're looking at an hour exercise, you don't really need the stuff. But you get out there for several hours, you're going to need it, right? Anytime you're in the heat for hours and hours, or you're sweating for hours, you're going to need to replace some of your sodium. Chloride. So chloride has a recommended daily intake of 2,300 milligrams a day. This is also part of table salt, right? NaCl, sodium chloride. It's involved in fluid balance, nerve function, nerve transmission. It forms a hydrochloric acid in the stomach. Deficiencies of this stuff are really rare, except in cases of extended vomiting. So if you've got extended vomiting, whether it's illness or whether it's in bulimics, that could be a side effect as chloride deficiency. So toxicity, if you have way too much of this stuff, it really messes with your blood pressure, so you could have hypertension or high blood pressure. Where do you find this stuff? Typically in anywhere you find salt. Okay. So what about potassium? Potassium is another one you might hear about. It's involved in a lot of blood pressures or processes, including blood pressure maintenance. The RDA for this stuff is 4,700 milligrams a day. People that have high levels of processed foods don't necessarily meet the RDA. So, you know, making sure you get this if you eat a lot of processed foods is probably a good idea. Usually deficiency comes from things like frequent vomiting or diarrhea. Again, use of diuretics, being ill, bulimics, that could cause a deficiency in this stuff. Long-term deficiencies could potentially lead to heart arrhythmias, where your heart is not beating properly, and that's because the electrical signal is all out of whack. Okay, so supplements are probably not necessary for most people, but if you have a reasonably healthy diet, you should get plenty of this. Megadoses can affect your nerve transmission and possibly cause death, so that's a good reason not to take large doses of supplements. And toxicity on accident, not coming from large amounts of supplements, is really rare except for kidney malfunction. Again, you're not going to get too much of this on accident. You're going to have to take megadosing of supplements, or of supplements. So where are you going to find it? We found it in potatoes, spinach, bananas, meat, milk, coffee, and tea even. People think of potassium, they tend to think of bananas. And you'll hear people that like, oh, you lost a lot of potassium in your when you were sweating, and that's why you cramped, so replace it with a banana. And there's not really a whole lot of evidence to support that. But on the other hand, if you think bananas keep you from cramping when you exercise, and it seems to work for you, then I wouldn't tell you not to do it. Okay. Then we'll move on to trace minerals. I'm going to go ahead and put that in the next slide. I'll finish this off because I'm bumping up against my limit of 15 minutes on the video. So the next one will be trace minerals. It'll only be a few minutes long.